Hello, my name's Andrew, and today we're doing a first impression review of the much requested Vivo Barefoot Tracker AT MOC, aka moccasin. This is essentially a slightly different version of Vivo's SG tracker, which they released last year. And it has a different style, but also a few different features, which we'll talk about. But most notably, it has this double sewn upper, which is kind of like a traditional Native American moccasin style, which I think looks really cool. And then they've blended in with a lighter colored sole. If you're wondering about the color of the sole, it's not white, it's more of like a cream, which I like. I think it would have been a little like too much, you know, if they had made it pure white, but it feels like it fits with the color of the stitching here. So this is all stitched all the way around, and then also the sole is stitched, which is really important for durability. It does potentially add in or let in just a little bit of moisture, but I find that I rather have a stitched sole, you know, versus something that's glued that could come out and just sacrifice maybe just a tiny bit of water resistance. But overall, I took them out on a walk this morning, and it was probably about 38 degrees. The grass was really wet, and I hate walking in conditions like those if I don't have a highly waterproof boot, because then the water gets in, your feet are like freezing and cold and wet, and it's just, yeah, not fun. But anyways, in terms of the toe box, it's got Vivo's typical wide toe box. It looks a little bit pointy just because they've stitched it that way on the top. But if you look at the back, there's actually quite a bit of room here. And the leather is fairly soft. You can see that it's got some nice suppleness to it. It was kind of like a medium weight, you know, so it has a little bit of that work boot feel, but still a good amount of flexibility, you know, where you can just bend the whole thing in half. In terms of the volume, it's kind of medium, you know, there's some room here. It's not super skinny, but I do think that they could raise it a little bit, because once you put like a wool felt insole in here and then a pair of Injinji toe socks, which I also like because they just help provide airflow in between my toes, and then, you know, maybe like a smart wool on top of that, it starts to be too cramped in there. You know, I think like the wool insole and mid layer of Injinjis is probably as much as I would want to put in there, because I did notice, like, because the leather is mid-weight, when you bend it, you do get a little bit of pressure there, and this will kind of clear up a little bit as you use the boot more, because the leather gets softer, and that's just like what leather does. But I will say I have had that issue with other mid-weight leather boots, and what you can do is you can take a thick pair of socks, and then whenever you're not using them, you can just stuff it into the front of the boot. And what this does is that it just kind of helps the leather stretch out a little bit on the top and just give you some more room here. In terms of the laces, they are polyester, and then the lower three grommets are metal. They're also reinforced and padded a little bit so you don't feel them on the inside of the boot. And then on the top, you've got quick release eyelets, and what I really like about these is that they grip well. So you can even hear it. I'm just gonna show you on the mic here. You can hear that pop, and once they're in, they lock into place, which is nice, and they're not hard to get out. But I like it when laces hold like this on the top, because then you can kind of just set the boot how you want in the front, and then when you're tying the laces, you just kind of like lock them in, and then you can just like leave the laces hanging there, you know, and they don't go anywhere. You don't have to worry about the thing becoming loose, you know, so it really helps you get a good fit lockdown. And then in terms of the security on the top of the boot, they do have it sculpted in the back, so there's plenty of range for the boot to move where your tendon is here, so you're not getting any pressure, and you're not feeling like you're like locked in, you know, which is important for a higher cut boot like this in the back. It does look a little more slim, but I found that because the leather is so flexible and soft, I didn't have any issues with kind of like pinching, which I've had with some Vivos. Like I had it with the Tracker Decon, because I think it just had a little bit more stiff materials in through here, but it felt really good when I was out walking. When I first put it on, like I said, you could kind of feel a little bit of that work bootiness, but yeah, once you start getting the leather warmed up, it becomes very soft and flexible. It creates this nice lockdown for your ankle on the top so that you're not slipping forward and backward, especially when you're going up and down steep hills. That can be really nice. It does have a gusseted tongue, which you can see there in the front, so you can get these boots wet up to here and the water's not gonna come in. If you do a creek crossing, there's no waterproof membrane in here. That was one of the things that Vivo Barefoot removed. And what that does is it makes it more breathable. On the inside, you've got merino wool lining here, And this is extremely breathable. It's antimicrobial, so it prevents the boots from smelling. And they have a nice natural earthy smell. And it's also moisture wicking, so it helps move moisture out of the boot. So you've got merino here, it's nice and soft, and then you've got leather here. It's also perforated, so this also helps with breathability and just moving moisture and heat away from your foot so you don't overheat. And then it's quite hard to see inside the boot because it's deep in there, but you can see that there's more merino lining here on the sides, and then there's a leather footbed on the bottom. So they say you could wear these barefoot, and you definitely could, although if it's like super cold, you probably want, you know, a layer of socks. And what I really like to do is put a wool felt insole in there, and this is super flexible. It doesn't affect the ground feel at all, but like I said, with the merino wool here, it's really breathable, wicks moisture away, and if you get any moisture on the bottom of the shoe, it helps disperse it so that you don't get that like soggy feeling that you would have if you had like synthetic or cotton socks. Most of Vivo Barefoot's winter boots come with the thermal insole, and the cool thing about this is that it has like a space blanket material in there. So it is a little bit thicker. You can see that it has a bit more structure to it than a wool felt insole, but if you're in like really wet conditions, it can be helpful because it just creates a barrier underneath where if water seeps in, it kind of just stays under the insole. It doesn't get your socks wet, which can be important if it's really cold and wet, because that's the worst possible scenario for keeping your feet warm. Also, just a tip on lacing, I tend to lace a little bit snugger towards the bottom of my boots, and then the top, when I'm putting them on, I'll like lean forward as far as I'm planning on leaning forward when I'm walking in my stride, and then I'll get the top ones locked in, and that just gives you a little bit of room. You don't want too much room because then you're slipping around, but what happens if you just put the boot on straight and you don't bend forward at all, then it just gets too tight in here, and then you feel like you're walking in a cast. So I think that can really help get a good balance. And then I really like that they have the padding here. It's a minimal padding, but especially on the inside, it's very soft around your ankle. This is one place, like I said, with the Tracker Decon where I could feel some kind of like pinching, you know? So they've got the padding here, and then there's a little bit of thinner material here, which helps with your ankle bone. In terms of the water resistance, these are pretty much all dry. It didn't take them too long to dry. I would say probably about 2 hours. And when I took them out, like I said, the grass is really wet. And one thing I noticed is that because it has this lip here, I think it did tend to trap just a little bit of water around the edges because it couldn't flow straight off. But you know, if you have like snow and slush and stuff like that, even a boot like the Tracker SG, sometimes you can still get moisture just sitting on top of it, even though it has a more open area for it to just run off. So sometimes that's a case of like just needing to flick your feet as you're walking to get some of the moisture off of there, but it never penetrated through. And that's a nice thing about any kind of waxed natural material, whether it's waxed leather or waxed canvas. Like I am testing a waxed canvas poncho from Jack Stillman right now, and I was out in pouring rain, and the rain just kind of like goes right off of the poncho. And then even when it gets wet, what happens with wax is that it sort of saturates the leather or the canvas or whatever you're using. And so the moisture really can't move in there quickly. It kind of just like slowly moves in there. And once it's saturated, it has a really hard time getting through. And even if some does get through, it's a really nice combination to have merino and leather, wax canvas or wax canvas. Because once the moisture gets through, then the merino helps disperse it around the boots so that you really almost never will get completely soaking wet with that combo. So yeah, it's definitely like the Batman and Robin of hiking and whatever. So let's talk about the sole. Vivo's made the sole a little bit thinner, which I like. It's now 6.5 millimeters, which is still, you know, slightly above middle of the road in terms of thickness, but yeah, it's got some really good flexibility. You can flex it diagonally, you can flex it horizontally, bend the boot in half both ways. But they've also upgraded their tread a little bit. So I'll show you the original. This is the FG2 tread, and it's got like fairly thick lugs, and they've added a little bit of definition here. They've kind of cut the lugs so that you get a good amount of flexibility. But the new all-terrain sole, I thought it was Appalachian Trail when I first saw AT, which would probably also be a good name for it. but it has a few new features. So they've also cut it down the middle, but it's got more of a chevron shape now, where you can see that these parts are sort of like recessed, so that when you're going up a hill, it provides you more traction. And then obviously they're a little closer and wider at the back for more durability. But then they've also kind of texturized just the surface of the lugs as well, so that you get a little bit more grip on slippery surfaces. I was testing it on rocks and stuff like that, and I really like the sort of, I think they're a little bit wider than the FG2, so it provides you a little bit more surface area and protection for like sharp boulders and stuff like that. It's not gonna save you on a super slippery, mossy rock when I was testing it on just like a really flat, wet surface. But overall, I feel like this definitely is a true all-terrain sole, which Vivo Barefoot hasn't quite had yet. They've had the FG, which is really good for firm ground, and they've had the SG, which is really good for soft ground. And this is just like the perfect combination, because there's enough space in between here to work for soft ground, but then they are wider, especially in the back, and more durable. You can hear that they've got some nice balance of toughness and thinness as well, so that you're not feeling like the boot is super clunky. And then because there is space in here, and because the lugs themselves are deep, but the midsole is a little bit thinner, you get a lot of flexibility. You also get a lot of ground feel. Like, you can see how easy it is to press the midsole part of the boot, even though the lugs are a bit more meaty. And so if we're going out on roads, it actually felt really nice on pavement. And even though the lugs are a bit thicker, it kind of would roll along smoothly because of the lighter and more flexible midsole. And there's just a ton of ground feel, like I could feel gravel, just like small rocks and stuff that you wouldn't normally be able to feel with a boot that's this rugged. But yeah, I hope the mock style does well this winter, because then Vivo might be able to produce multiple styles in terms of the colors, and they could have like the white sole for anyone who wants a more modern look, and then maybe like a brown sole for anyone who wants just like pure classic. If you live in super cold climates, this is the Blanca Winter. This is the warmest pair of barefoot boots that I own, and probably the warmest pair of boots period that I've ever owned. It has a extra wide toe box. However, there is a ton of insulation in here. It has very thick merino wool lining, and so I've gotten these down below 0 degrees with no problem if I'm adding just like a thin wool insole and some Injinji toe socks, maybe an extra thinner layer. But like I said, it does take up some room here, so it can get tight, kind of like the Tracker MOC. But overall, still a wide boot. It does have a little bit more stringy laces. I wish it had laces that were more similar to the MOC, that were a little more durable, but they've never torn out so far. They do have quick release up here. I kind of like the MOC style better, because these tend to fall out if you don't tie them tight enough. They don't really grip as much on the laces, but it does feel softer, a bit softer than the Tracker MOC. And it has a waterproof leather upper, or at least it's waterproof when you first get it. Like I said, you can have problems with the glue coming out, which would be a vulnerable spot for waterproofing, but you can use some shoe glue or other glue product. If you see anything developing, you just put a little in there and then you clamp it, for 24 hours, and usually that can fix the problem. But mine have been waterproof so far, which is really nice, because it's good for those like days when it's like slightly above freezing. It's just like wet and slushy and slippery and freezing cold. But yeah, the tread is 8 millimeters, and this is another reason why it's good for wet, cold conditions, because it has a lot of flexibility. There's lines cut through here, and then they've divided up the lugs, so but also they're very aggressive lugs. They're kind of claw-like, and they really grip well going up hills, and then in the opposite direction going down hills. But the lugs are also kind of springy, so this boot is, even though it's 8 millimeters, it feels like a thinner boot, and it's got a lot of flexibility for walking on roads. Like, because the tread is sort of springy like this, and most of the surface area is kind of curled underneath, it doesn't wear that much on roads like some soft ground type boots will. So it's a great one for casual and super cold climates, but also for trails, because there is enough room in here to get some serious grip. Another great winter option would be the Softstar Switchback. This is the leather one. They also have a vegan option in the super fabric. I think this one is a little bit more breathable. However, the waterproofing is probably not as good as the super fabric. I'm gonna test the super fabric version in a few weeks, hopefully. So I'll let you guys know on that. But yeah, they do have a regular width, which is what this is. And then they have a primal width, which is really good for people with extra wide feet. So unlike Blanca, there is more room in there. The merino wool lining isn't quite as thick, but they are super warm, and they're also, they have a 6mm Vibram Mega Grip tread with a little bit of 3mm of foam padding in the middle. So this creates some really nice insulation from the bottom, even though the merino wool lining is not as thick as something like the Blanca Winter. But some nice durable laces here, quick release holds that hold pretty well on the top, which I like. And I also just love how flexible this boot is. Like, even though it's got a really rugged sole, you can actually run in these, which is amazing. And the tread has a lot of space in there. So if you're going up and down slippery hills, whether you're hiking or running, it's really good. But because the tread's only 6mm and then the rest of it, they're 9.5mm in total. But yeah, this part is 3mm, so it's really soft. So it doesn't affect the ground feel as much as a thicker boot would if it was just all rubber, you know? But in terms of the Mega Grip tread, this is my best tread that I have for slippery trails, because actually really any type of trail, because it's got enough room in here to create some really good grip, especially if the triangles. Then you've got these wider portions on the outside for a little bit more durability and protection on rough terrain. But like I said, the leather version, not super waterproof. It will soak through fairly easily. But yeah, I'll let you guys know about the super fabric. If you want something a little lower cut, this is the Zero Denver leather. They also have it in canvas, which is another great option. Both of them can be waterproofed with wax. One thing I noticed about these when I first got them is that when I took them out, you can see that there's just a little bit of dimpling, and it seemed like that happened as soon as they got wet. So I probably should have put a layer of wax before I took them out, and that's what I would recommend if you ended up getting these, because I think that the leather is just a little bit thinner. It's also softer, has that more of that suede type leather versus the leather on the MOC, which is taro, and it's very sleek and it sheds water a little bit easier than something like the Zero Denver. But I'm gonna test these. I'm not sure how waterproof they can get when you add another layer of wax, but it will definitely help. And I'm just hoping that I can get through, you know, just like wet grass and stuff like that. I wouldn't wear these for slush, you know, like heavy winter slush. Like the name suggests, Denver is usually a little bit drier weather, but they have a nice wide toe box. It gets just a little bit tapered towards the tip, but generally speaking, a lot of room. And because the leather's soft, it'll really expand to fit pretty much any foot shape, unless you just have super wide squared off feet. Durable laces, I think they're polyester as well. And then mid-cut, like I said, it has a little bit of firmness, but overall, a very flexible boot. The canvas is even more flexible, so it just depends on what you want. It feels a bit softer, whereas the Zero Denver just has a little bit more structure. Reinforcement in the back, and then it's got a 5.5mm tread, so 1mm thinner than the Vivo MOC all-terrain sole, but some really good flexibility, good durability as well. Very tough boot. I like the sole as well for all-terrain use because there is a decent amount of room in it. But they've also split the lugs sections up for some really good flexibility, and then they're closer together and more dense in the back for protection. And then they've got the chevron shape for some up and downhill traction. So yeah, that's my first impression review of the Vivo Barefoot Tracker AT MOC. And friends, but if you'd like to support the channel, you can shop the referral links down below. Browse and filter more products with the shoe finder tool at my website barefootwear.org, or watch my zero drop transition video to learn more about barefooting. Finally, if you have a question about the Vivo Barefoot Tracker AT MOC or about barefoot shoes in general, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time. Peace.